I'm Dr. John Plake, Chief Innovation Officer at American Bible Society and Editor-in-Chief of the State of the Bible Research Study. Since 2011, we've been exploring America's relationship with the Bible, faith, and the church. And today it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Henry Cloud to the podcast. Dr. Cloud is an acclaimed leadership expert, a clinical psychologist, and a New York Times bestselling author. His 45 books, including the iconic book Boundaries, have sold nearly 20 million copies worldwide. He has an extensive coaching background and experience as a leadership consultant. He's devoted the majority of his time to working with CEOs, leadership teams, and executives to improve performance, leadership skills, and culture. Dr. Cloud, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, in 2025, the State of the Bible research team released a chapter focused on trust and the Bible. Basically, what we wanted to know was if our relationship with God through Scripture has an influence on our experiences of interpersonal trust and institutional trust. And as it turns out, back in 2023, Dr. Cloud released a great new book titled Trust, Knowing When to Give It, When to Withhold It, How to Earn It, and How to Fix It When It Gets Broken. It is an excellent book. In fact, our leadership team at the American Bible Society has been going through that book. I have it right here, and I highly recommend that you get it if you've not read it. It's accessible, it's insightful, it's all the things that Dr. Cloud is known for. And so we wanted to invite him to walk us through the data on trust from his perspective. So in 2025, we reached out to a representative sample of Americans and asked them to respond to 5 questions that we took from something called the General Trust Scale. We asked each respondent to what extent they agree or disagree with these 5 statements. Number 1, you agree or disagree, people are basically honest. Number 2, people are trustworthy. Number 3, I am trusting of others. Number 4, most people are sincere and well-intentioned. And number 5, people will usually keep their promises if they make them. So, Dr. Cloud, to get started, you have called trust the fuel for all of life. In fact, you wrote, nothing in life works without it, especially relationships. We are wired biologically, neurologically, emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically to trust. Trust is the currency that drives everything. And I think that's great. In fact, I remember hearing you talk about this at an E10 conference back in 2023. And it was a wonderful speech. I wonder, in the moment that we're in as an American society today, do you see the greater challenge that we're facing, the fact that many of us withhold trust when it's warranted and needed, or is it that we give trust when it isn't deserved?
Yes. And the question actually gets at the heart of the whole issue. We always think of trust in terms of who's trustworthy, and absolutely you have to. But as God created everything that we know, there's always subject and object. So there's the one doing the trusting, and there's the one who's being given the trust or invested in. And so the question really gets to, in part, who's answering the question? Because we are wired for trust. Nothing happens in life without trust. When the moment a baby is born, they have been in a totally trusting environment. They were getting everything they need, because we get everything we need from outside of ourselves. God's the only self-sustaining entity. Think about this. If you're not wired for trust, then stop breathing. You're wired. I mean, you can't exist without trusting the air around you and taking it in, or the water you drink, or the food that you eat. But God's wired you with an algorithm that runs throughout all of our systems to ask one question before any other question: am I safe or not? And if the answer is yes, then we engage and we take in love, we take in support, we take in information, we take in guidance, we take in God's word, we take in our relationship with Him, we take in every single thing that we have to live. But we have a trust muscle. And God has wired us with this algorithm that runs on a lot of factors, taking in data at the primary levels, not even verbal, mirror neurons, the tone, somebody's body, stance, and just how well they are attuned to you versus, looking around. We get all this. And the problem people make is they try to get trust from others by persuading them into it. And nobody's listening until they feel like the basics are there, which is that you're with them and you understand them. So to your question, it's some people are their trust muscle, I'd put them in three categories. Some people, their trust muscle is working by and large like it should, which means Hebrews 5:14 says that through practice and experience, we've had our senses trained to discern good from evil. And that means somebody's in touch with how they feel and their intuition and what they're seeing and what they're hearing. So if somebody is put together pretty well, they will trust the right people, to your question, and they won't trust the wrong ones. By and large, everybody gets fooled. There's a Bernie Madoff that slips under the cracks with even smart people, right? I wrote in the book, bad people happen to good people sometimes. You can get duped. But by and large, if your trust muscle is broken, it's going to be broken or damaged, one side or the other. We tend to ignore or not be able to discern the greasy people that we should not be trusting, or you don't trust when you should be trusting because you've been injured in some way. And that's where micromanagement comes from. It's where controlling others comes from. It's where suspiciousness comes from. It's from walling ourselves off. So we all have, Jesus said it pretty clearly. Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye without first looking at the log? Now, why would we look for a speck to evaluate someone? But then he said, first, get the speck out of your own eye. In other words, our trust muscle needs to be able to see specks that we should say no to, but also see clean water that we should drink. So it's both.
That's really interesting. I keep thinking through some things I've heard you already say about this. And one of the stories that you told was about sitting on an airplane with someone who was explaining to you that he didn't trust anybody. And you pointed out how incongruous that was because he's sitting on an airplane being piloted by someone that he clearly was trusting to get him to his destination. And so
And didn't even know his name or her name.
that's right. So
And then I said, you say you don't trust anybody. Well, first of all, I thought, I'm a psychologist and you're crazy. I mean, don't tell me that and past the pilot, how do you know the guy that put gas in this thing didn't fill it with chocolate milk? I mean, don't tell me you don't trust people. But then I did say, because he said overtly, he said, I don't trust anyone. I learned a long time ago, you can't trust people. I only trust myself. And I said, well, that's not true. Look out the window. You're at 40,000 feet. But the point is, if I saw the movie of your life, I would see some significant betrayals. And you've learned from those that you're going to wall off your heart. And then if we watch the rest of the movie, I could also show you where that has cost you. And that's the issue.
So you point out in the book that there are 5 essentials or kind of preconditions of trust. And if you haven't read the book, you really should. Dr. Cloud illustrates.
No, I read it.
Not you, but if our listeners haven't read it, they definitely should. So those 5 preconditions, you kind of illustrate them from the story of doing a knee replacement, as I recall. And you're trying to evaluate, hey, who can do this? You walked us through this idea that you're trying to figure out who can you trust with your limb, with your mobility, with your recovery and the issues that you were having. Can you kind of walk us through those 5 essential factors that build trust?
Yeah, let me set it up a little bit. A lot of times we just, you get the question, well, can you trust him? And we go, yeah. And really what a lot of times people are answering is he going to lie, cheat, or steal? And it's the moral foundation of that. And you think people are trustworthy that are honest and ethical. But how many people have you worked with in life that never would lie, cheat, and steal, but you wouldn't want to work with them again? Well, those are other reasons. And God has built us with some essentials. So what I did was I did a factor analysis of all the research on trust and, relationally, in leadership and in faith and all of that. And it basically comes down to 5 buckets. And our mistakes generally are we don't check all the boxes. That's a problem. So let's go through the boxes real quick. If you want me to tell my surgery story, I'll be glad to. So I fell out on Santa Monica Pier. I mean, my knee had been getting bad. And I knew I was going to have to do something. But then one day I fell out. I couldn't walk. I was in a wheelchair. And so I needed to find the surgeon. So everybody said, well, you got to go see the guy. And they sent me to the guy, right? Who's the famous one in LA. And so I go in, he walks in. Hi, I'm Dr. So-and-so. Let me look at your films here. Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh. You need a total knee replacement. That's the only thing that's going to fix this. He said, why don't we get you scheduled? And then he said, and I'll tell you something. He said, this is what I do. If anybody tells you anything different, they're wrong. I understand. He used that word. I understand what's going on here. So you got to get this thing replaced. So let's schedule it. And then he starts to walk out. And I said, Doc, hold on. He said, what? And I called him back. I said, that's it? You just look at my pictures and now you're going to amputate my leg? I mean, isn't there more to? He said, no. That's all I need. I understand what's going on here. Well, I didn't feel understood. Let's put it that way. And I wanted a second opinion. So I called a buddy of mine. He said, no. You got to come to my guy. He's the one. And I was in LA. He was in Little Rock. I'm not going to Little Rock to get my knee replaced. The Lakers are here. The Rams are. There's got to be some guy that knows. He said, no. He said, I'm going to have him call you. So he calls me. He said, yeah, Fred sent me your pictures, your films. He goes, how are you walking around? I said, I'm not. I'm in a wheelchair. He said, well, tell me about the pain. When did it start? And so I told him, he said, does it radiate up or does it sit there? Is it off and on? And he starts asking all these questions. And then he said, something like about the progression of it. And he's really kind of trying to understand what was happening with it. And all I can tell you is I was feeling very different with him. And I mean, the other guy was a genius, right? But it just felt different. And I said, well, he said, you can come back to Little Rock. He said, I'll send you a video. Terry Bradshaw just flew back here and I did his. He made a video on how you can do this, fly in and fly out. And so I said, well, let me think about it. And so I said, I want to get another opinion just because I don't want to go to Little Rock. And so I got the other guy, right, in LA, and I go to him and he sits down and he's really understanding. And he's had me tell him about it. And then about 5-10 minutes into it, he says, hey guys, come in here. Because he had passed the first essential. We trust someone first off when we feel like they understand me. They're listening. Psychologists call this attunement. And we feel like we understand somebody when we understand them, but we understand somebody when they understand that we understand. When they start to go, whatever we're saying, they're getting it. Yeah, he gets me. Yeah, this guy really hears me. They understand. The Bible says he who gives an answer before he listens is a fool. It says the heart is deep waters, and the person of wisdom draws them out to know the intentions. And so I felt like this guy really understood me. But the third one, or that one, the third one, he really understood me. But then he goes, hey guys, come in here. And 3 residents walked in that he was training. And he says, so look at this guy's knee. And he turns around and see how it moves right here. See the muscle, the way it folds under. And this is exactly what our research project is about. So we're going to get him and get all of his data and the paper we're presenting next week. I want you to gather. And he just starts talking to them about my knee. Well, he flunked number 2. Number 2 is we sense somebody's motive. Who's this for? The Bible says very clearly, do not merely look out for your own interests, but also the interests of others, even holding the interests of others in higher esteem than your own. And I didn't care if he did a research project. I want this to be mutual. He can benefit, he can charge me. But it felt like the whole motive was about him. You ever got an email from somebody that said, hey, I got a good opportunity for you? One person, you pick up the phone and call them because you trust them and they know it's really for you. And the other one, you get it and you go, yeah, right. For who? It's on a team. Somebody's got an agenda. It's not really for the team. They're driving their department or they're driving their career. You can feel it. So that's number 2, the motive. Well, so I called the Little Rock doctor, Dr. Lowry Barnes. If you're anywhere near there and need a knee, he's your guy. I called him back because I didn't feel good about Dr. No, motives. And so I called him. He answers the phone. He said, "Hey, it's good to hear from you." He said, "I've been thinking about you. I read about your golf career and competitive. We got to get you back on the golf course, man. You're too young and you got 2 daughters and they're going to be having kids and you got to be out hiking with them." And he starts talking about, he was getting so happy thinking about me and what this was going to do for me. His motive was not just about himself. He wanted the best for me. Employees, when they feel like the company, it has not only its own interest in mind, but also their well-being, their careers, their personal lives, all of that. Check. Okay, so dadgummit, I'm going to Little Rock, right? Because now I'm trusting him. Well, what if at that moment, that's number 2. First, we got understanding. Second, we got motive. Understanding, we have to have that. But even predators lure people in with empathy and care and understanding, but their motive is very different. So we got the first 2. What if he had said at that point, yeah, and I'm really excited to do your knee because I'm an OB-GYN and I've never done one of these before and I've wanted to since medical school. Well, he just flunked number 3, which is, does this person have the ability to pull off what I'm going to be entrusting to them? Now, here's where we make a lot of mistakes. Sometimes I got called in a company to do some CEO coaching. The board said, the new CEO is floundering. The morale's down. The results aren't. And I said, well, how do you get to be the CEO? And he said, well, he was our COO. And he was fantastic. 10-year run, built everything. Everybody loved him. And so we promoted him when the CEO retired. And I said, he was your COO? And they said, yeah. And he's a CEO now? And they said, yeah. I said, well, where'd he get the E? And he said, what? I said, he was a COO. Now he's a CEO. Where did he get the E? He goes, we promoted him. I said, no, you put him in the chair, but where did he get the chip that was going to be able to have the abilities needed for that position, even though he's very trustworthy over here? So see, trust is contextual. We can trust somebody deeply. Pastors do this all the time. They have a vision for a church. And what do? There's a group of people that support them, and these are godly people, and they're in for the mission and all this, and they become the board from the outset. 5 years later, you're in a building project or you're in a legal situation or whatever. They don't bring the skills to the party that those chairs require, even though you would trust them with your life in another context. So the third thing is, we have to look at, I can trust you in 50 different ways, but I'm about to trust you with this over here. Do they have the ability to pull off what I'm entrusting to them? Well, I look up my surgeon. I found out he's a president of the American Association of Joint Replacement Surgeons. He holds patents on many of the implants that go into people's knees. He trains the guys in LA, but here's the one that got me. He has a lab with the PGA Tour on golfers' knees. So, hey, I'm in. Okay, check. We got understanding. We got motive. We got ability. All right, so let's say I fly back to Little Rock, and he does the exam, and he says, all right, so, this is a teaching hospital. Before we do your surgery tomorrow, if you want to watch one today, you can watch through the window there and see how. I'm going, there ain't no way I'm watching you do this before I do it. But what if I had? So I'm watching the window, and doctor, good understanding, good motive, good competencies, carving on this guy's leg. And 10 minutes into it, blood starts spattering everywhere. And all of a sudden he's going, oh no, the patient's bleeding. Somebody did. And he loses his head. Well, he just fought number 4, which is the character. Do they have the makeup to pull off what we're entrusting to them? This is contextual. I had a brother-in-law who's a Navy SEAL. If the bad guys are coming after me, I want Mark. They've got the makeup and the character and the training, and they're glued together in a way. They're not afraid of anything. They will run towards the danger to save you. But if my dog dies, I'm not calling Mark. Mark would have said, it's just a dog. Let's go shoot a bunch of them and you'll get used to them dying. For that job, I'm calling one of my codependent friends who won't save me from a burglar, but they'll cry with me, right? We got to look at how somebody's glued together. I had a president of a big Christian organization call me one time for leadership development. with his team. And I said, I love working in Christian organizations because we talk about spiritual aspects of leadership. He goes, wait a minute, stop. I don't need you coming in here with any spiritual stuff. These are the godliest men I know. They've been walking with the Lord for 25 years. I need leadership development. And I said, well, aren't they related? He said, no, these are godly men. I need leadership development. I said, what kind of leadership problems you have? He said, well, I can't get them to work together. They all like protect their departments and their resources, and we got a transcendent goal here, and I need them to work together past their own, whatevers. I said, these are the godly men? He said, godly men. I said, well, my Bible says love doesn't seek its own. 2 Peter 1 says, add to your faith knowledge, and add to your knowledge self-control, perseverance, mutual affection. I don't hear a lot of mutual affection for what each other are doing here. So you can call it leadership development, but this is spiritual also. So I don't care what you call it. The Bible looks like the best of all the research. I mean, everything we have in research validates the scriptures every single time. But how somebody's glued together, are they ready, aim, fire, or are they fire, ready, aim? Are they impulsive? Are they risk averse? How many times you've seen leaders ready, but they can't pull the trigger on let's go? Do they have perseverance, or when things get hard, do they bail and say, no, let's do something else? I mean, how they're glued together for what the job requires, the context is important. Okay, so I find out, Dr. Barnes, my friend's wife actually was an anesthesiologist. And she said, I've been in the operating room with him for 20 years. She said, there's nobody like him. Nobody. So anyway, we checked the box on the character thing. So let's say, okay, we got understanding, we got motive, we got the competency, ability, we got the character. So, okay, what if he says, let's go do it, let's go schedule it. We walk out the hall, and there's a dead body lying in the hallway. And I go, Doc, what's going on here? He says, well, it's the guy I operated on yesterday. It didn't go so well, but I'll do better with you. Well, he just flunked number 5, which is, what's the track record? And what we got to look at is what happened yesterday. The best predictor of the future is always the past. Doesn't mean people can't overcome failure, but what's happened in between the failure and when we're trusting them now, because that's a new past. We're still trusting the past. They had a big failure 3 years ago, and you're putting them back in that position? Yeah, but in the last 3 years, they've been in deep counseling, and they mentoring, and we changed their position, and they had to earn their way back, and they perform. Well, we're still talking about a track record's been established, so we can trust them now. So there's your 5. And I've found out Dr. Barnes had the track record. So you got, do they understand me? If I'm going to trust them, they understand what I really need, what hurts me, what causes me pain, what my business needs, what this company really needs from them? Or are they looking at, trying to just talk me into the deal? What's their motive? Is it just about themselves and their career, or is it for the bigger reasons and something other than themselves? Number 3, can they pull it off? Do they have the skills? Number 4, do they have the character? Past just lie, cheating, and stealing, but their whole makeup. And the last one, have we seen them do something that, and it may not be the same position. COOs become CEOs all the time, but they have a track record of having done the kinds of things that we're going to be depending on. So that's kind of the algorithm, and we make mistakes all the time because we check 2 or 3 of the boxes and think, yeah, I'll trust them, but look at the whole picture.
Yeah, that's great. And it gives a heuristic for thinking about, all right, I feel inclined to trust someone, or I feel disinclined to trust them, but what do I check that against? Kind of how researchers would say, how do I operationalize trust in my day in and day out life? And I think that's a really helpful set of handles.
It's also good. You mentioned you're doing with your team. What I like to do with teams is I'll put those on the table, and like, let's take the first one, understanding. Does this department really understand what that other department needs from you in order to succeed? I mean, pastors. How about this one? Does your worship leader really get it that you need to know the songs by Thursday afternoon and not last minute Sunday morning? I mean, do they know what the ripple effects are in your life if they don't do that? It's really important for teams to know what the other side needs from them. That's just a simple example. And you get teams to go through the 5. What are we depending on you for? And look at these areas. It's strong.
That's awesome. I want to kind of turn our attention to some other research that we've been doing. We really have, a lot of people have been looking at Gen Z, America's youngest adult generation. And one of the things that we noticed in our research on trust is that younger adults in America seem to have a lower ability to trust. They're more likely to show up with low levels of trust, less likely to show up with high levels of trust than
Yeah.
older generations. And so I just wonder, can you help us understand why might it be that younger adults struggle more with trust than older adults do?
Well, we have to go back to how we're designed. The younger adults, if you look at, I mean, you should look at the numbers. How many of them have grown up in a home that truly understood the needs of a developing child? The need for security, the need for stability, the need for connection, the need to learn how to emotionally regulate yourself, the need to develop your talents and being guided and mentored and all that. So, who gets me? Like they just never had that experience. Or number two, I was just reading in the scripture last night. Children don't save up for their parents, but parents for their children. How many of those young people have grown up where the home was oriented with the transcendent motive of being for the family versus somebody's own either their career with an overworker or somebody having an affair or, the squabbling that ends up in a divorce. They haven't felt a lot of times that they've grown up in a family unit that had a transcendent motive for the family and the well-being of the family instead of selfish individuals a lot of times, or at least one. Thirdly, the competencies that haven't been built in them and that they haven't seen and haven't been modeled and haven't been taught. And you could just go down the list, but you look at the backgrounds of where, I was at a meeting this morning, and you can fact check me on this because it's not my fact, it's an expert told me, but that 90% of incarcerated people in America came from a home that was one parent or broken. I don't know what the numbers is, but the point is that this generation has grown up with a lot of brokenness. And one of the things we were talking about was we can't do something we've never seen. God has made us imitative. Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Walk in the way that he walked. Learn these things from faithful people and trust in others. It's how we learn to walk. It's how we learn language. It's how we learn to emotionally regulate. We learn. But you learn from seeing and experiencing as well as being taught. There is such an opportunity for the church here with Gen Z to do exactly what I experienced when I was a graduate student and Gen Z's age, and I moved across the country. There was a family that adopted me. I went to family dinner with them once a week, hung out at holidays. And I got to really see a great set of parents. Got to see what a dad actually does. I mean, I'd see my own dad, but I needed it in my young adult life too. And see what a marriage looks like and see what a family looks like and experience all that. What if every church in America looked in their congregation and said, hey, what 20 something needs a place to come over and have a home cooked meal and sit around the table with a family and, see how it works? And God, what a different place we would have. Every church would do that. We do it in our own family.
Yeah. That kind of mentoring and modeling is so important. I know when I was working in Christian higher education was a campus pastor. We used to hear from our undergraduate students, hey, I really want a mentor. And scaling mentorship is so hard in university ministry because there are more students than there are faculty and staff who are maybe competent at that. And so we used to ask them, would it be okay if like an upperclassman was your mentor? And they're like, no, that's not what I'm looking for. I don't need somebody who's 21 helping me, navigate building my schedule or telling me what professor is a good teacher of this class or that class. What I
Right.
need is a family that'll welcome me into their home on Sundays to watch football and eat nachos and just hang out.
Exactly.
And in that natural interaction, create an environment where I can be known and where when something comes up that I don't know how to handle, I have someone who I have a relationship with and I'm able to ask them about it.
That's right. I've got one right now, 23, and it's so much fun. And I suggest once you read this book and then we go through it, we're talking about where his career is going to go in business and how you do personal finance and how you build wealth and budgeting, as well as his spiritual life and how he sees God, as well as a bunch of other stuff. And it's a rich experience for both sides.
Yeah. Well, one of the sad phenomena that we've been tracing over the years in our research is this really high incidence of trauma in America. I don't want to get into all of the details of what is trauma. You can read about that in our State of the Bible research, but it's probably no surprise that traumatic experiences seriously undermine our ability to trust others. In fact, the data that we released this month show that there are three kinds of trauma that significantly impact interpersonal trust. And again, no big surprise, assault, abuse, and then unwanted sexual contact. And what I'm curious about is what would you say to ministry leaders, these pastors and church leaders who are seeking to care for people who've had these horrible kinds of traumatic experiences and whose ability to trust not just the person who harmed them, but now in a more generalized way, their ability to trust anyone has been damaged? How do we help in those settings?
Well, if you think about trauma and trust, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to define trauma. I think a lot of things that get defined as trauma aren't. Like I got an email from um uh a friend who's got a 5-year-old and who's going to school for the first time, and the kid, you know, as was a little anxious about it or whatever, and he dropped him off and he said he's such a courageous little guy. I go, he went to school. That's not a let's save courage for come on. He comes from a stable home. It's time to go to school, kid. Drop him off and shut the door and say, have a nice day. But there is real trauma. I mean, there is real trauma. And I've spent decades with trauma victims. And here's why it relates to trust, among other things. What trauma does is it lives in the limbic system mainly and in your body. And that's why a lot of times you can't talk people out of it, right? Give them Bible verses. Well, it's like AT&T talking to Verizon, those two networks, you got to go in a different door. But the big thing that trauma does is it activates the system into everybody's heard, a fight or flight, like static dynamic. In other words, they're they're always on. The car alarm is going off just because a garbage truck went down the street. It's too highly. And so they're in flight or flight, kind of right below the surface all the time. We call it hypervigilance. They're always looking, what easily startled and all this kind of stuff. So think about this, fight or flight. If you are in a state where your organism is on to either fight or flight, how are you going to trust if somebody's coming close to you or wanting something with you, for you, whatever, and all you can do is fight them, push them away, or run the other way? By definition, trust is affected by trauma. Now let's flip it. There's a lot of factors that go into healing trauma, but number one is safety. Number one is safety. So to church leaders, are we, if you're going to be, quote, trauma informed, which is a big thing out there today, if if you're going to be trauma informed, just recognize my primary number one goal with this person is to have them feel safe. And they're first of all going to be feeling safe by feeling understood. And so that's why, somebody asks you a question about a position or something. What do you think about this? Well, tell me your story. How'd you come to that question? Tell me a little bit about where you're coming from. I gave a talk one time at a leadership conference, and a guy walked up to me afterwards and said, I'm the lead hostage negotiator for the FBI. And he said, everything you just talked about is our entire training program. He said, when I walk into a bank, guy's got a bomb strapped to him with 40 hostages, we don't go in and try to persuade him this is a bad idea. Dude, this doesn't end well. This is stupid. No. We go in and ask for his name and say, hi, I'm Joey. They sent me in here to talk to you. Tell me your name. They get his name and say, so tell me, how'd we get here today? Tell me how we find ourselves here. What's been going on? The Bible says a person's heart is deep intentions, and the person of wisdom draws them out. Make it safe for them. And that comes, how do we know what's safe for somebody until we listen to them?
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to agree, but they got to feel listened to. I mean, I've talked to patients that I'll ask them a question. They go, I don't know. Let me check. I remember I went on an ambulance, working in the emergency room, went out with the ambulance for a woman who was locked in her house. And we opened the door with the police and said, can we talk to you? And she goes, I don't know. Let me talk to the man. We go, okay, now the cops are getting ready because they think she's being held hostage, right? But she's got to get permission from the man to talk to us. And so we're watching. She walks back to the back of the room and looks in the window and nods. The man was a fly that she was taking our orders from. So she comes back and we said, so how'd it go with the man? What did he say? And we know the fly's not the man. You're not going to explain, but we had to meet her where she was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you got to make it feel safe. That's the first thing I would say. Get to know them and find out what feels good to them and what doesn't. And after you develop trust, then you can start to nudge them into maybe something they're uncomfortable with, or can we just sit in a group? You don't have to. I had trauma victims I would put in groups, and they're not. I'm not ignoring that group. I said, well, tell you what, why don't you join the group, and I'll tell the group you're just here to observe for a while, and we're not going to ask anything, and you just want to sit. And I've had them sit in there back when I was doing clinical work for a long time before they ever said a word. And then they did. I remember one patient could not look at me for the first year. And now she's a high functioning hedge fund person. But they got to feel safe.
Yeah.
And they got to know what your motive is. I mean, just work through the 5 steps. And also, here's another thing. If you're in church world, when they drive onto the parking lot, the first person that talks to them, or when they come in the door, that's where the trust begins. Or who answers the phone, that's where the trust begins. So it starts in the beginning.
So it sounds like we help people with trauma and trust issues by being trustworthy and
That'll
by
work.
creating an environment where they can feel understood, they can feel safe, they can feel heard. I
Yeah,
know some of our listeners.
and here's what's frustrating about that. This is really frustrating, especially if you've ever dealt with people who are traumatized and have trust issues. You're trustworthy. What's the matter with you? I won't hurt you. I promise. And you know it. I mean, God has this problem. He's trustworthy, and he gets really frustrated when people won't trust. So there's that side of it, and we have to enter. And what did he do with a group the total trustworthy God, a group that rejected him? While we were yet sinners, he died for us. But what did he do? He didn't sit up here and preach at us. The law was given through Moses. No, but grace and truth are realized through Jesus. He went incarnational and became one of us. We don't have a high priest who can't sympathize with our weaknesses, but he himself has been tempted in all things. And so you got to meet them where they are. It's got to start there. You don't have to stay there, but you got to start there.
Well, I need to move us along for the sake of time. This is great. I could carry on this conversation for a long time. One of the second to the last thing I kind of want to hit on here today is there seems to be a really strong relationship between forgiveness and trust. I remember back in my university days, I worked with a university president who'd been president of that university for almost 40 years. He was just a brilliant guy. And I remember he preached in chapel one day and kind of disentangled what for me was a muddle between what it is to forgive someone and what it is to trust someone. And people who struggle to forgive also have very low levels of trust. And those who are able to forgive find that they can trust others. And you write about this at some length at the end of your book about the connection between forgiveness and trust. Can you kind of help us understand, maybe in just a few minutes, the difference between those two ideas, how they're related, how do forgiveness and trust work together?
Well, first of all, forgiveness only takes one person. You can do that. You don't need the other person to do anything for you to be able to forgive. Because forgiveness, you're the banker and they owe you. You got a debt against them. You can cancel the debt. That's forgiveness. I'd put a middle step in there, before trust, and that's reconciliation. You can forgive someone. Remember, forgiveness is free, and it has to do with the past. Forgiveness has to do with what we're forgiving that somebody has done. So now you don't owe me anything. I forgive you. But to be reconciled in the relationship where we're good with each other, that takes two. Now you've got to come to the party and say, I'm sorry. You say, okay, you're forgiven, but I'm sorry. And it's a real sorry, right? And so now if you're really sorry, you know what? We're good. We're good. But we're at ground zero, right? All the past is wiped away. We're reconciled. Forgiveness is free. It's about the past. It only takes one. When we get reconciled, though, now they say, well, can I have my job back, or can I move back in the house after the affair, or whatever it is? Well, now we're moving past, we're reconciled to what can I trust you with? Forgiveness is free. Trust is earned. So we're going to trust, like the Bible and all the research say, we're going to trust incrementally as faithfulness is exhibited. Entrust these things to faithful men, the Bible says. The one that was faithful in 2 talents will be given more. The one that was faithful in 5 will be given more. The one that wasn't, we're not going to trust him with those talents. We're going to take them away. So we can forgive somebody and be fine with them. I've got people I've done business with before, and did a few big events in my life where I was really, really, really betrayed. I'm fine with them. We're friends. If I have something that I'm looking for partners in, no, I don't want to work with them because they haven't changed. They still do business kind of the way they did it. And nothing nefarious, but not trustworthy in some ways. And so we trust what's trustworthy. And just because you forgive somebody doesn't mean that they're worthy of trust yet. They may be, but we're going to work through the 5 things we talked about to find out if they are. And also the forgiveness thing, and how does it affect future trust? Well, that's the objective side. But here's the problem with forgiveness and affecting somebody's ability to trust. If you're still resentful, which basically resentful and forgiveness kind of is 2 sides of the same coin, right? If you're still resentful and haven't truly forgiven somebody and you're trying to trust them, but the slate's not clean. Think if you've ever seen anybody that had an eye injury and their eyes, like blood is going over the screen or water goes over your iPhone screen. Every new day, you're looking through that blood. You're looking through that pain. You're looking through that resentment. And how do you trust somebody that you're not kind of like okay with? Now, here's another complicating factor. You can have fully forgiven somebody and there still be pain as you're trying to learn to trust them. You see this in affairs that everything's forgiven and even they're back together and it's going really well. And then I had a couple not long ago that said, I said, there's this conference over here in Seattle or somewhere that I think would be great for y'all. And she said, I can't go to Seattle because that's where the other woman was from. I still can't. And so you're going to see pain come up that's triggering. It doesn't mean it hasn't been forgiven a lot of times. It doesn't mean that they're not reconciled. It doesn't mean they're not trustworthy. It's just a wound that hasn't healed. So you got to factor in all that stuff. And it's hard work,
Yeah.
frankly.
Well, as that university president said years ago, he said, "There are people in my life who have hurt me, and I've forgiven them," meaning I don't want God to get them. I don't want the ceiling to fall on them, but I'm probably not going to have them over to breakfast either. And so that was kind of the distinction for me between forgiveness and trust. Of course, there's
I
more
don't
to it.
want the ceiling to fall on 'em. That's a good one. I haven't heard that one, but I like that.
Well, we're about out of time, Dr. Cloud, but I did want to take time for at least one question on institutional trust. A lot of our listeners are pastors and church leaders, and we live in times when trust in institutions like the church are really at an all time low in our culture. I wonder if you could give any advice to those leaders about building trust with their congregations, with their communities, maybe with their stakeholders as they seek to show themselves to be trustworthy.
Well, there's a lot, but the very best one, the most powerful one, it's not gonna come from your marketing only, even though there's messaging and obviously there's narratives, and we have to work with all this stuff. It's very complicated. It's doable, but it's complicated. But the best one is proximity. When people are untrustworthy of some big other, 99% of the time, there's a big space between them, and it's just what they've heard, it's what they've seen, or might have had one experience. And they have this all or nothing thinking, which is subjective thinking, which comes from the more experienced part of the brain where facts don't matter, is they're hurt this talking. But when they meet someone, one of those, and they experience him as kind and loving and trustworthy and other oriented and this, that, and the other, that how does a body heal itself? It's cell to cell. And so if they want them to trust the church, remember the church is building its individual cells of a body. And so I would be thinking about it certainly at that level where the one-to-one experiences are had. And then in the bigger narrative, I would be illustrating stories of those experiences. And that's a big deal. When people can see and experience real life trustworthiness from the other side that you thought was so bad, that changes people's hearts and minds. But I had experience. I've had many of these actually. I work with a lot of, high performers, and sometimes people of extreme wealth that own big businesses and all this, and and I have friends in all sorts of parts of the land, and and I say I work with CEOs, and or billionaires or whatever, and I'll hear, oh, well, that must be fun. All those CEOs are jerks, and companies, all they want is, and all this kind of stuff. And I'll start telling them about the ones I work with. And they go, what? Really? What? And I'll tell them about the care they have for their employees. I'll tell them about the work they're doing and what they give to and all of that. And I have had so many people tell me, you've really changed my view of what a Christian was or what a CEO is like or whatever. And I said, look, you've probably been to a restaurant and gotten food poisoning. Does that mean you're never going to a restaurant again? And we have a big problem in, I think, almost developmentally, cognitively, our culture has become character disordered. And I mean that in the diagnostic sense of personality structure, not lie, cheating, or steal. I mean how we're glued together. And we have a very all or nothing thinking paradigm that's operating. All churches are like this. All Christians are like this. All conservatives are like this. All liberals are like this. All. Well, it's hard to do all when you're experiencing pieces of people that aren't part of that all. And so I think you've got to begin to show pieces that are different than the narrative. That's a big deal.
I remember when I was pastoring, I would occasionally run into people who'd say, I don't like Christians or I don't like preachers, but you're okay. And it was kind of illustrative of that whole idea that trust moves at the speed of real relationship. And so, if I could tag on to what you were saying, I think as we build authentic, um, two-way relationships with people in our communities, we build trust at the speed of one relationship after another. And it isn't just about
That's right.
pastors doing that, but enabling the people in our churches to do the same thing and encouraging them to
Do
do
we
it.
do we have a second for are we out of time?
Take your time.
I I have an amazing story about that. I was speaking at Messianic rabbis gathering, and I spoke one evening, one morning, and that next evening. Each time I got on the stage, I saw a vision of a kneecap in my head, and I heard the word kneecap, kneecap, kneecap. I go, what am I supposed to do with this? And I just gave my talk. The next morning, I gave my talk, but it wouldn't go away. I got up on the stage, and at the end of it, and I'm not one of these that I don't think I've ever done this before. I said from the stage, somebody here might have a problem with your kneecap, and I want to pray for you. So just bear with me. So I said a prayer, and I said, if that's you, come talk to me at the back of the room. So this lady runs up to me. She said, that was me you prayed for. I said, you have a kneecap? She said, no, it's my ACL. I said, it wasn't you. I'm looking for a kneecap. This is a kneecap. And I prayed for her. She goes away. But then this guy walks up to me, Middle Eastern guy. And he said, that was me you prayed for. And I said, do you have a problem? What's your problem? He said, my kneecap has an infection underneath it, and the doctors haven't been able to stop it, and the pain is debilitating. I said, well, let me talk to you. And we went to the green room, and I said, close the door. I want to pray for you. And he said, no, you don't understand. I said, what? He said, when you prayed from the stage, my body filled with electricity. My knee caught on fire. He reached down, he pulled the knee brace off, and he threw it across the room and said, I'm healed.
Wow.
I said, well, tell me, what are you doing here? He said, well, I was born in the Middle East, and my parents gave me to the jihadists. We were Muslim. And I got my first AK-47 at 6 years old, and I've led many bombings and everything in the Middle East. And they moved me to America to recruit young men into jihad. And then, long story short, I'll make it quick. He said, I had a car wreck, broke my collarbone and my legs. I was taken to a hospital, and I just moved here. And the doctor, who was a Christian, said, okay, now where do you go from here? Where are you going to rehab? And he said, well, I live alone. He said, you can't do that. He said, well, he said, no, you can't do that. Come into my home. The doctor and his wife took this young man in, and he said, they just loved me. They were Christian. I was sent here to kill them. And they were loving me, and I had been taught they were the enemy. They were bad. One day I went into my room and I cried out to Allah, I have to know, are you the real God? Long story short, but he said, the room filled up with light, and Jesus appeared to me and said, I have loved you since the foundation of the world. You are to follow me. And he gave him a mission of reconciling Jews and Muslims in conflict. But the point being, I could tell a long story he told me, but they loved him so much that it broke through his view of what the infidel was. And that's one example of just cell to cell. Who are we loving into a new way of seeing the world?
Man, what an amazing story. How God is at work in ways we never see. But thank you for your time today, Dr. Cloud. So, my guest today has been best-selling author, leadership expert, and clinical psychologist, Dr. Henry Cloud. You can learn more about his work by visiting drcloud.com. And of course, you can learn more about the state of the Bible in America by visiting stateofthebible.org. And please connect with American Bible Society at americanbible.org. For the entire State of the Bible team, I'm John Clayton. Thank you, and God bless you.